Mr. Perry, please take the lead.
I think we're going to see a tremendously emotional and aggressive campaign between the two halves of Israel, basically. One that is more traditional, conservative, religious, and disinclined to change anything as regards the West Bank. And the other that is more liberal, more moderate, more modern, more universal. The two sides really despise each other, and it will, I think, sort of crystallize into the question of whether Netanyahu can return or in fact, probably go home.
Did the mere formation of this government change the jigsaw puzzle called Israeli politics, or are we more or less in the same spot, Mr. Perry?
I think it did two very important things. One, it showed that there are people in the classic Israeli right wing who reject the authoritarian direction in which the right wing, not just in Israel, but in much of the world, has taken. Essentially a moderate right wing, not unlike what you see in America with, let's say, the Mitt Romney wing of the Republican Party. The second thing is they allowed an Arab party into the coalition, and the Arab Party agreed to come into the coalition formally. And this has never happened before. These two things, I think, set a precedent, but also prove, despite the difficulties that we saw, that it is possible, at least for a year and a month. I think you'll see more of that going forward.
What I think is ironic is that the Arab Party Ram that was part of this outgoing government, it was mentioned already, the person who actually opened the door for that party to take an active role in government was Netanyahu himself. Of course, it was done in a move of desperation, but I think it's become, or is slowly becoming, a norm in Israeli politics that makes Israel's body politic that much more inclusive. I think it's important. It's an important lesson we can all take into the future.
By the way, if I may interject, I think it is truly a little bit pitiful that people like Bennett in the outgoing government say that they only allowed Ram into the coalition because Netanyahu set the precedent by negotiating with him. By doing that, they actually validate the idea that Netanyahu is some kind of arbitrator of what is legitimate in Israeli politics. And each time they do it once more, and they say, Netanyahu, you started the flirtation with Mansour Abbas of Ram, I just shake my head in stupefaction, because it really does hand the reins to Netanyahu. I have to say, Netanyahu, if he has a chance to become prime minister, will find a way to overcome whatever discomfort, a good performance by the extreme right will cause him. I'm pretty sure that if he had to ally with, Stalin to become prime minister, he would hesitate for only a small amount of time. Yeah, it'll be an election about whether Netanyahu gets to come back. I would personally like to see them talk about the real issues, what to do about the coming binational state, what to do about the coming potential theocracy that's around the corner if Israel doesn't change its relationships with the ultra-Orthodox, but I doubt that the center-left will have the courage to bring that up in this campaign.
Well, at this pace, people will not have enough money to buy gas to get them to the ballots even, but no one will talk about that, I'm doubtful. And the new incoming Prime Minister Yair Lapid, some would suggest against all odds, played his political cards quite right, but the question is it enough? According to all polls, and he has grain of salt, etc., etc., he has no ability to form the next government.
I would disagree. I think if the anti-Netanyahu, anti-authoritarian range of parties in the Knesset gets a majority again, then we'll have a repeat of what happened last time. I think the interesting thing is with the Amina party. That was on the fence before. It's not clear if it, and Bennett was tempted over creating a majority even without the Joint Arab Party by offering him the prime ministership. It isn't clear whether Ayelet Shaked is willing to play that role again. I think most people expect her to rejoin the authoritarian right fully. And that really reshuffles the deck. When people figure this out, I think the polls will change accordingly, and I would be almost surprised if she passed the electoral threshold.
Yamina, if you look at the actual voting track record, was one of the most disciplined parties of this coalition.
May I rebut that?
Please, Dan.
There were several key pieces of legislation that would have been signature achievements for this coalition that weren't even brought to the Knesset because of Yamina. And we're talking about the legislation that would have prevented a criminal defendant from setting up a government in Israel and
what
others.
Should have been the jewel of this
which would have been the jewel. And the fact that wasn't done because of Yamina right now is a very big anchor weighing down the coming campaign. This and more. Yamina MKs may not have voted against the government government actively, but they abandoned the government. Indeed, 3 or 4 were either abandoning the government or threatening to abandon the government out of 7. And, you know, politics is a lot about momentum. That established the momentum that basically, in the end, didn't bring down the government, but caused them to fold up stakes and try again.
The leftist Meretz and Labor parties, any potential revival on their end, or are we talking wasted votes here?
Big wild card is whether Meretz and Labor will join. I mean, the logic very much argues that they should, and I think Labor in particular has to understand that they have undergone a process not unlike what happened in France to the Republicans, the Gaullists, and the Socialists. They used to be a large party of power, and they no longer are. They're now a niche party. The natural party of power for the modernist liberal half of Israel is Yesh Atid today, and the others are satellite parties. And Meretz and Labor both basically propose the same thing, which is a more social democratic or socialist approach than what Yesh Atid does to political and social issues.
Given what the vote looks like on November 2nd, I would not rule out that at least certain parts of the ultra-Orthodox orbit might shift over to a center-led
hold
government.
on, but I didn't rule it out, not for a second. I said, if the center-left wins the election, I don't rule out that, for the reason you mentioned, financial imperative, they would indeed swallow their pride and support the center-left.
Lapid investing some efforts in rehabilitating ties with the ultra-Orthodox parties. Gentlemen, time flies.